Blackstone Audio presents Ice by Ice-T and Douglas Century. Author's note. People have to learn how to tell stories without implicating those who may not want their stories told. Some names and situations have been changed to protect those involved. It's hell to be an orphan at an early age. This impressionable stage, no love breeds rage. I must stand. Part 1. Cold as Ice. 1. Because I first made my name as a rapper claiming South Central L.A., people often assume I'm strictly a West Coast cat. But my family was actually from back east. I was born in Newark, New Jersey, and grew up in Summit, an upscale town in North Jersey. There was this tiny area of Summit where most of the black families lived. My parents and I lived in a duplex house on Williams Street, and on the street right behind us, backyard to backyard, was my aunt, my father's sister. For my first few years, it was just a real middle American life. I don't remember taking any trips or anything exciting. One thing I do remember, when my dad would take me places, he would get White Castle burgers and throw me in the back seat, and he expected me to eat my White Castles and be quiet. My dad and I spent a lot of time together, not saying anything. I went to the YMCA, where I learned how to swim and do gymnastics. It was kind of a big deal to have a membership to the Y, because it meant your pops had money to spend on you. I remember going from Pollywog to Dolphin, then graduating to Shark and Lifesaver, and I'm pretty proud of the fact that I learned to be a good swimmer. There wasn't any violence or trauma. It was quiet, simple, and suburban, an almost perfect childhood, except for me, every couple years, losing a parent. My father's family came from Virginia and Philadelphia. He wasn't a brother who talked a lot. He was a working man, a quiet, blue-collar dude. For years, decades, he worked at the same job. He was a skilled mechanic at the Rappiston Conveyor Company in Mountainside, fixing conveyor belts. Despite the fact that Summit is predominantly white, I can't say there was overt prejudice in the town, at least not within the adult world as I observed it. All my father's friends, all the guys he worked with, were white working-class dudes, lunch bucket dudes. Black and white, they were all cool with one another. My father was a dark-skinned brother, but my mother was a very fair-skinned lady. From what I understand, she was Creole. We think her people originally came from New Orleans. She looked almost like a white woman, which meant she could pass, as folks used to say back then. Her hair was jet black. She was slim and very attractive. I recall people telling her she looked like Lena Horne or Dorothy Dandridge. The fact that my mother could pass intrigued me, even as a little kid. I understood that it was a big fucking deal. In my household, it was often a topic of quiet discussion between my parents. When you can pass, you get to hear the way white people speak freely with one another when black folks aren't around. You get that kind of undercover look at the way white folks really think. So my mother understood racism intimately, from both sides of the fence, and there was never any tolerance for it in the house. As hazy as a lot of my childhood is to me, I do have a very clear memory of the day when I first learned I was black. Before that, I guess, I never really knew I was black. Everybody figures out there's something called race at some point in their life, and for me, it happened when I was about 7 years old. At the time, I was going to Brayton Elementary School in Summit, and I used to have a white friend named Alex. He was one of my closest friends in school. Alex and me were walking over to his house one day after school, and we bumped into this other kid from our class named Kenneth. He was one of the few other black kids who went to Brayton with me. Soon as we ran into Kenneth, Alex told him, "Kenneth, you can't come over." Kenneth looked pretty bummed out, but he just walked on, head down, kicking the curb the way little kids do. Then we ran into some more kids from our class, and Alex had no problem inviting them to his house to play. We walked along the sidewalk in silence, and the question just popped into my head. "I thought you told Kenneth you couldn't have any more friends over," I asked. "Kenneth?" Alex laughed. "Oh, Kenneth. He's a darky." He said that shit so matter of fact. I didn't understand it. My mind was tripping the rest of the afternoon. Damn, I thought. Alex must think I'm white. I guess I'm passing too. Now, I had this other white friend named Mark, and the rules at his place were a little different than at Alex's. All the kids could come over to Mark's place to play in the yard, but when it got dark outside, as soon as the twilight made it hard to see, the white kids were allowed to come inside the house and keep playing, but the black kids were sent home. Nobody asked any questions. Nobody said shit. It was just accepted as the way things were. And I was still considered white enough, or maybe they were just confused about what exactly I was, that I could stay and play with the white kids while the handful of black kids just split. It was confusing as hell. When I got home, I told my mother about it. She looked at me with this half smile. "Honey, people are stupid." That was her line. It's one of the things I recall her saying to me a lot. People are stupid. She didn't break that down for me, but I understood her to mean, you can't necessarily change the ignorant way people think, but you can damn sure control the way it affects you personally. And then you keep it moving. I guess my mom was preparing me in her own way, simply by downplaying it, telling me that this was some bullshit, racism, that I was going to be dealing with in some way or another for the rest of my life. Even today, I find myself constantly saying those same words under my breath. Yo, don't even sweat it. People are stupid. My mother died of a sudden heart attack when I was in the 3rd grade. I've read some craziness online that my parents were killed in a fiery car crash. No. They both died of heart attacks, 4 years apart. It was me that nearly died in a car wreck, but that was decades later, when I was already hustling out in Cali. When my mother passed, I didn't cry. To this day, I don't fully understand why. I didn't shed any tears. I didn't go to the funeral either. I didn't have much say in the matter. In those days, that's how grown folks handled kids when someone died. Someone, must have been my father, decided to keep me at the house, away from the church or the funeral home. All the younger kids, me and some cousins on my dad's side, were upstairs in our house playing the whole day. We were kind of oblivious. We never went downstairs with the mourners. I don't think it's quite the same today, but back then, there was a conscious effort to shelter kids more. You'd be sent upstairs. You might even be sent away to someone else's house during the funeral arrangements. The first time I ever cried in my life, the first time really letting out tears of grief, was at the funeral of my homie Victor Wilson. Beatmaster V, the drummer from my band Body Count. And that was in 1996, when I was a grown-ass man, after watching Vic's body get devastated by leukemia. Even today, I don't dig the whole scene of a funeral. Funerals are ugly. I never go to them. I'd much rather remember the person alive. I don't want to see anybody lying in a box. My mother didn't have any family around us. In fact, I never knew anybody from my mother's side of the family. Even today, I don't. My father, though, had 2 sisters and a lot of cousins. My aunt in the neighborhood had 2 daughters. There was a lot of family showing up at the house who I'd never seen before my mother's funeral. All these folks, distant relations and friends, kept coming by to pay their respects. Also, I later found out, to steal stuff. That's the one thing I recall vividly after my mother's funeral. My father was pissed because a bunch of shit was missing from the house after it was all over. My mother was a very supportive and smart woman, and I know she cared about me, although she wasn't very affectionate toward me. I only have a few specific memories of her, vague and distant, like some grainy home movie, someplace in the back of my mind. I'm sitting on the couch watching Batman on TV. She's calling out, "Tracy," telling me to come to dinner. I remember her sitting on the sofa a lot, with balls of yarn and knitting needles. That was my mother's only hobby. She loved to knit and crochet. I'd watch her making these intricate squares and then connecting them together into quilts. We had her quilts neatly folded on the beds and sofas in the house. This may sound strange, but I don't know that much about my mother's personal story. I'm not a very backward-looking person. I realize that a lot of people like to dig into their past, research it, log into genealogical websites to find out about their roots. I have no interest whatsoever in that shit. I've never been a guy to spend too long looking in the rearview mirror. To me, it's like John Lennon once said, "I never went to high school reunions. Out of sight, out of mind. I'm only interested in what I'm doing now." That's my attitude, too. My father, who was a church-going 9-to-5 guy, did his best to raise me on his own after my mother died. My aunt, who lived right behind us, helped to raise me, too. My father also had a housekeeper named Miss Sononi. She was from the deep South, and she would come over every day and cook these Southern dishes for dinner. So they all chipped in to raise me. Well, raise me? That's kind of a stretch. Wasn't too much raising going on. Just like my mother, my father wasn't much of a talker. He was more of a supporter. The bills were paid. I ate. Nurturing? Nah, that wasn't my pop's style. Nobody in my immediate circle talked to me much. Nobody asked about how I was feeling. That's the main reason that these days I talk to my kids a lot. I talk to my wife a lot. But in my house as a kid, there was just not a lot of conversation. My parents and my aunts weren't made in that let's talk it out mold. You'd expect a boy who lost his mother to start wilding out, turn into a real menace. But I never got into much mischief, except for this one situation with my bike. The year after my mother passed, my father got me a bicycle for Christmas, so I rode it to show one of my friends, and I put it on its kickstand in front of his house. I went inside to play with his racing cars. When I came back outside, fuck me, my bike was stolen. At first I was scared to tell my father that my bike, my brand new Christmas present, was stolen. And finally, when I told him, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise his hand. He just shrugged. Well then, you ain't got no bike. And he went back to putting away the groceries. That was how matter-of-fact he was. Eventually, I got this sneaky game going, learned how to boost pieces of bikes. A couple wheels here, a frame there, a seat, some handlebars. I never had the heart to steal a whole bike, so I just put the bits and pieces together. While my dad was still at work, I had a little chop shop going in my garage, and I put the stolen parts together of all these different bikes, learned to assemble them like a pro. It was kind of a Frankenbike, but I hooked it up nice with some spray paint and model paint. Then, after I did one, it kind of got good to me. By the 6th grade, I got a pair of bolt cutters and went out stealing parts of other bikes. I must have thought I was a real little criminal mastermind. I would sneak out of the house while my father was asleep, go out on the prowl at night, walk over to another neighborhood and steal the parts I needed, hooking up my own bicycles. My father never noticed that I went from having no Christmas bike to having 3 or 4 weird-looking, brightly painted bikes all around the yard and in the garage. Or if he did notice, he just never said shit to me about it. As far as parenting styles go, my dad was a real old-school dude. One evening stands out in my mind. My father, Miss Sononi, and I were at the kitchen table finishing up dinner. My pop said something to me, and for some unknown reason, I decided I wanted to mumble something back. This was the first time in my life I tried to talk back to him and say something fly. I said it so quiet I thought I got away with it. But when I stood up, my father stood up too. I can still remember the way the legs of his chair screeched on the linoleum. He took one step toward me, and he hit me square in the solar plexus. Boom! My knees buckled, and in slow motion, I fell to the kitchen floor, knocked all the breath out of me. Then he stood over me. Boy, you talk shit to me when you can whoop me. That's the way it was done. He didn't give me a spanking or a slap in the face. He hit me like a grown man. He was putting me in check, trying to show me what happens to men in the real world when they talk shit. You see a lot of people on the internet talking mad shit, because if they did the same thing in a room full of people, there would be repercussions. If that was a face-to-face conversation, somebody would step to them, hit them in the solar plexus, and have them doubled up on the ground. When you come from an environment where people have no problem putting you in check physically, you learn you better measure your words. Be careful what the fuck you say. My dad was teaching me a real valuable lesson, one I never forgot. Never mumble some sarcastic shit to somebody who obviously can fuck you up. I wasn't lonely, but I felt pretty alone after my mother died. Then when I was in the 7th grade, I found myself truly alone. For me, it was just a regular day at Summit Junior High. I was 12 years old, and I'll never forget that spring morning getting pulled out of class and taken down to the principal's office. The principal's face was pale, and he kept mumbling something about how sorry he was. How sorry. I stood there in silence. Sorry about what? And there was this look on both the principal's and the secretary's faces. I now understand that look. It's the look of a person trying to tell you, but they can't find the words, that somebody died. Man, that's an ill look. The principal told me, "Tracy, you need to go home now. Something terrible has happened." That word hung in the silence of the office. I mean, when you're 12 years old, that word, terrible, does nothing but amplify the fear and anxiety about whatever's coming at you. I left the office. I don't remember getting into a car, but somebody must have driven me to my aunt's house. My aunt, whose eyes looked swollen, told me what happened. "Tracy, your dad just passed." Both of my parents died really young, still in their 30s, of massive heart failure, 4 years apart. I was still so young that the experiences of both of my parents' deaths are kind of blurred together in my mind. And being an only child, I was going through all of it in my own little bubble. The first thing that happens is you get shuttled off into this place where everyone is trying to protect you. The wake and funeral is happening, and you can see all the adults getting dressed in black and preparing the flowers. But they keep you away, sheltering you from the reality of death. All these grown folks are wailing and sniffling, but they try to hide it from you, since you're a kid. All day long, these older people are coming at you saying, "Tracy, are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm all right." "Are you sure you're okay?" "Yeah." Here's what's real strange. Everybody, all the adults around me, expected me to be losing my shit. Just tripping. And not only was I not tripping, I was not even engaged in it. It was almost like I had the ability to will myself into this zone where it really didn't seem to be happening to me. I was emotionally about 1,000,000 miles away from all the adults, all the crying and the handkerchiefs. I just had one thought in my mind. So what's next? What's the next move? Yeah, I was detached. But looking back on my childhood, I don't think there was an attachment. In other words, even when I was a little kid, and I'd fall off my bike, skin my knees, and want to cry, there was nobody to really cry to. So I learned to suck it up really quick. I'd hit the ground, dust my ass off, and not show anybody that I was fucked up. I wasn't one of these kids who was always coming home with hurt feelings, running to hug my mother. None of that clingy, emotional shit was my reality. I grew up in a non-affectionate household. I think kids are trained to know what they're going to get, and once they get a taste of it, they'll always want more. It's like that shit with Pavlov's dog. If you cuddle a kid a lot, he'll want more cuddling. If you don't, he'll just accept that as his reality. He doesn't look for the added affection. Everybody in the family was bugging out that I didn't cry when my father died. They remembered how I hadn't shed a tear for my mother either. But I just wasn't built like that. Wasn't wired like that. I didn't have an ounce of self-pity in my bones. It didn't hit me. Damn, I'm an orphan. Even as a 12-year-old kid, I knew I was going to have to make it on my own. And my survival instincts were kicking in. Whether hardcore or not, you wore the right color, or your ass got shot. That's how I'm living. 2. I didn't have a lot of family, which meant I didn't have a lot of options. Like I said, my mother had no relatives that we knew. My father had 2 sisters, and for a few months, I lived with my aunt who lived right behind our duplex. But then I was sent to my other aunt and her husband in Los Angeles, supposedly just for the summer. One afternoon a few weeks into the summer, a delivery truck with all these boxes arrived. My clothes from the house in New Jersey. Shit. It was disorienting. Nobody even took the time to explain what was happening. I didn't know my aunt and her family. They were essentially strangers to me. And what made it tense was the fact that my aunt had already raised 2 kids. Her youngest, my first cousin Earl, had just graduated from high school, so my aunt and uncle were in that mode to retire, be empty nesters, get on with that next stage of their lives. And now, here comes this kid from Jersey, and not just any kid, an orphan, an adolescent, a boy just entering the wild the fuck out years. Yeah, I felt a lot of resentment from them about me being there. Nobody said it outright, of course, but the vibe was always, okay, Tracy, we got to take care of you. Never, we want to take care of you. I was in limbo. Being relocated when you're not expecting it is some crazy shit. Even if you don't miss the kids you grew up with, you miss your routine, your habits, the way you know all the shortcuts in the back alleys when you're bombing around on your bike. Now you're in an absolutely foreign place. As foreign to you as Algeria or Argentina. You realize that you're back at square one. You realize that you don't know shit. And I was about to find out the hard way that not knowing shit can be a life or death proposition for a teenager growing up in South Central LA. Fortunately, I didn't get thrown straight into the gladiator pits. I caught a break in that respect. My aunt lived in a middle-class black neighborhood, View Park. And the first school I went to in L.A. was Palms Junior High, a predominantly white school in Culver City. They bussed the black kids there, part of the court-mandated integration at the time in L.A. But it wasn't just the middle-class black kids like me coming into this white neighborhood. That was the first time I encountered kids that were coming on buses from South Central. They were tough in a way I'd never encountered. Not actually gang members yet, but they were the younger brothers of cats who were definitely banging. Going to a mostly white junior high in LA, that was a different zone, because now you're getting bussed in with all the black kids, and you've got the little white girls every morning already out in front of the school checking you out. And it's the height of puberty, so everybody's hormones are out of control. That's where the racial shit starts kicking in. Not some stupid, unspoken rule about all black kids going home when it gets dark. This was a lot more dangerous, because this was sexual. I'm going to tell it to you straight. I don't give a fuck. Little white girls are intrigued by little black boys. You ain't never going to shake that. And that leads to some of the biggest problems in the world, at least as far as the racists see it. Maybe we had a little bit more swagger or whatever, but from the moment we got off the bus, The white girls thought we were the hottest shit going. That caused some drama, because if you had a white girlfriend at Palms Junior High, you still had to get back on the bus and deal with the sisters. The white girls lived in Culver City, right by the school. But when the school day ended, your ass was going back to the hood. And in junior high, your relationships are solely based at school. No one goes home to hang out at each other's house. The sisters used to give the brothers an earful about talking to them white chicks. I didn't have any girlfriends in junior high. I wasn't cool enough yet. But I was seeing a lot of my homies dealing with all that drama. The biggest trip to me with LA was the size. The city is so sprawling, so spread out. It wasn't like the neighborhoods I was familiar with back east, where there's 25 or 30 houses on the block. In some parts of LA, your closest friend could be a 5-minute drive away. The first kid my age I met in View Park was Billy Arnold. Years later, he got killed in a terrible motorcycle accident. He was one of the coolest cats I ever met in my life. Billy had that kind of cool that's just inborn. I mean, this kid even had a cool mom's. He had a swagger. He had the flyest clothes and records. He even had a bedroom that looked like a 70s bachelor pad. When I was getting sized up by the kids in the neighborhood, as a new jack, don't matter where, you're always going to get tested. Billy, for some reason, said he had my back. And because I was friends with this cool-ass kid, I was more or less connected. Across the street from Billy lived the Stantons, and one of the brothers was a black belt, so nobody even thought about fucking with them. Between Billy Arnold and the Stanton brothers, I never really had problems with bullies or assholes trying to mess with me. During junior high, we were still protected from the whole gang thing. Even though kids from gang-affiliated neighborhoods were getting bussed to Palms, back in the 70s when I was in the 8th grade, the gang situation was just starting in earnest. But I was about to get a crash course in the gangster life in high school. After graduating from junior high, I decided I wanted to go to a local high school, Crenshaw High, which was walking distance from my aunt's home. I was sick of the bus and bullshit. From the jump, my head was spinning. Number one, it was an almost 100% black school. Wasn't one white kid there, and just one Mexican. LA is fucking segregated like that. All these kids coming from inner city junior highs to Crenshaw already got their little cliques. There were a total of 4 guys that went to Palms that came to Crenshaw, including my boys Franzel and Burnett. So I didn't have a crew. I wasn't really connected. My homie Shawnee Sean, folks got to know him later in my records and videos, was a grade below me, so he was still at Palms when I started Crenshaw. I felt like I was walking into a prison yard by myself. Hell yeah, it was intimidating. Plus, I was a tiny 9th grader, and there were 18-year-old 12th graders. These dudes were big, looked like grown-ass 225-pound men with sideburns and a 5 o'clock shadow at noon. When I hit Crenshaw High, the gang situation started to heat up in the LA school system. You have to understand, gangbanging started from a very small area in South Central LA. The Crips and Bloods started in a handful of blocks, and it took a while for it to branch out through all the schools in a city as big as Los Angeles. It started down at Washington High. Washington, Jordan, Jeff, Fremont. Those were the ground zero high schools where the gangs were coalescing. And by that summer, the gang life was just hitting Crenshaw. In its own way, Crenshaw was a crucial location because it was the school that was the unofficial dividing line between the east side and the west side. The dividing line between east and west is Crenshaw Boulevard. Technically, the dividing line is the Harbor Freeway. That's in gang terms. But in school terms, the line is drawn at Crenshaw Boulevard. After you go to the other side of Crenshaw, you get to Westchester, Palisades, University, LA High, Fairfax. Those are all West Side schools. The middle ground schools are Crenshaw and Manual Arts, right down the middle of the east-west divide. There were subtle distinctions, but they meant a lot to kids. The West Side kids were always known to be a little bit slicker, have a little bit more money, dress a little bit more fly. The East Side kids were tougher, wilder, more aggressive. Straight up, I understand it now. They were just the poorer kids. We used to say that the girls on the West Side looked better too. Again, it's just money. They could afford to have nicer clothes and gear. Also, as you moved more to the West Side, you'd get more into the interracial dating, so you'd see more and more mixed-looking kids. We had the lighter-skinned black girls on the West Side, and we thought that was something to be proud of. Because Crenshaw was a borderline school, there was still a mixing of the sets, and you had Bloods and Crips in the halls at the same time. That led to serious drama, constant beefing. I remember at one point, Time magazine referred to us as Fort Crenshaw. Nobody schooled me about the colors. That was an unwritten code that ran deep, and you didn't have a lot of time to decipher it. You'd see cats with pressed khakis, bomber jackets from the Army surplus store. They rocked Levi's, but in their own distinctive way, always cuffed on the outside. Some of the neighborhood OGs would go for this Prohibition-era look, rocking pinstriped vests and a kind of fedora called the Ace Deuce. The Ace Deuces looked almost like derbies, but they've got a micro brim around them, really small and tight to the head. Cats would take hair nets and pull them over the top of the Ace Deuce. They'd wear suspenders, but they'd let them droop down around the waist, not tight over their shoulders. Crips were known for their crocus sack shoes, always in shades of blue, brown, or black. That was a gangster staple. And of course, there was the flag. The blue bandana had to be folded precisely in the left back pocket. Crenshaw High was run by the Hoover Crips. When I started at Crenshaw, the biggest gang rivalry was with the Brims. Crips and Brims. The Brims wore red and Crips wore blue. The Crips kept their rag in the left pocket. The Crips pierced their left ear. The Brims did everything on the right, like a mirror image. The Crips had all these different divisions and sets. 8-tray gangsters, the Hoovers, the Harlem Crips. Every other gang united against the Crips, and any gang that wasn't Crip by default became Brim. The Van Ness Boys, the Denver Lanes, the Pyrus, the Inglewood family, the Athens Park Boys, all of them united into a coalition. Over time, the Brims came to be known as the Bloods. When I first got to Crenshaw that summer, there was still a gang in effect called the Bishops, a Brims gang. Over time, during my years at Crenshaw, all the Brims started to go to Manual Arts in Dorsey. The Crips took over Crenshaw. Anyone who wasn't a Crip or from a Crip neighborhood would transfer out. It didn't take long for me to learn how to walk the walk. In South Central, it's called survival. You had to know to wear your blue and look a certain way, or else deal with the consequences. Shit runs so much deeper than just not wearing red. You had to learn which neighborhoods were sworn enemies. Over time, there were these major wars between rival sets of Crips, like the Rolling 60s and the 8-tray gangsters, Monster Cody's set, and Caps kept on gunning down each other for decades. With those dudes, the banging became generational. Younger brothers and cousins taking revenge on murdered family, like vendettas in the mafia. You had to know to call your people cuz and never blood. Just saying sup blood, something I used to hear older dudes say all the time back in New Jersey, could get you gunned down quick. On most blocks in South Central, there really are no neutrals. Everyone's forced under the jurisdiction of the gangs just to stay out of the drama. You might show up in South Central a clean-cut, square kid like I did, but before you know it, you got the blue or red bandana folded up perfectly in your left or right back pocket. Everyone learns the rules fast, even the girls. Eventually, if you went any place in town and said, I go to Crenshaw, people would consider you a Crip by affiliation. You might try to tell them, but I ain't no gang. Nah, nigga, you from Crenshaw, you a Crip. You know them niggas. No, I don't. Shut the fuck up, you know them, and we're gonna send them a message through you. And that's the trip. In the gang-banging world, you can get it just for knowing motherfuckers. It's murder by affiliation. When I started at Crenshaw, the most feared shot caller in L.A. was Stanley Tookie Williams. Of course, years later, Tookie became nationally known while he was on death row, considered a stone-cold murderer by some, admired as a rehabilitated anti-gang activist and author by others. Tookie wasn't the founder of the Crips. That was Raymond Washington. But Took became the undisputed leader of all the West Side Crips. From time to time, Tookie and his crime partner, Jamel Barnes from the Avalon Gardens Crips, used to roll through Crenshaw. They were both huge, hardcore bodybuilders, and throughout South Central they were treated like rock stars. Back then, gangbanging was based on lifting weights. Wasn't all this gunplay shit. And you better believe Tookie was serious about his weight game. Tookie looked like he could take away Arnold Schwarzenegger's title. When you saw Tookie in real life, you felt like you were 10 years old and he was 40. It's like, these are some grown-ass men. You didn't even want to make eye contact with them. All the original hardcore bangers were Diesel, and that's where a lot of the gangster posturing originated. Back then, dudes would fight. Back then, you had to have hand skills. Wasn't nobody shooting nobody over the dumb, petty shit like they do nowadays. It wasn't based on that. Back then, you had actual tough guys. Not everybody was a muscle-bound monster. There was always some little guys in the clique, but trust me, they could fight too. Tookie and Jamel looked almost like twins, except that Jamel was light-skinned and Tookie was darker. Most days, they dressed identically in farmer overalls with the bib down, showing off their bare chests, shoulders, and arms. They'd pull up at house parties in a lowrider, and actually had some younger Crips in their set walking beside them, rubbing baby oil on their muscles so they could pose, flex, and have all these 16 and 17-year-old girls swarming them, screaming, going crazy. Tookie wasn't a regular presence at Crenshaw, but I was in homeroom with some of the most feared Crips of the time. Cats like Babyface, Anthony Hatchet, Jawbone. These were legendary banger names. One time this banger from Van Ness Boys, a feared brim named Butch, showed up unannounced and just mobbed through the school. He came through Crenshaw on some one-man army shit. The high-ranking Crip bangers weren't around that day. Butch didn't fuck anybody up. He just walked around, posturing, through his setup, talking mad shit. The next day when the real badass Crips got to Crenshaw, that's when it got violent. They started smacking niggas up. Yo, Butch was up in this motherfucker? What the fuck? They were pissed that we didn't defend our turf. But Butchie was big. Butchie looked like he could rep 300 easily on the bench. We wasn't doing nothing to him. We just gave him a wide berth and hoped he'd leave quietly. Another time, before all the brims transferred out of Crenshaw, I had a run-in with a Van Ness boy named Gary. We were all in the school weight room. I'm trying to get buff, trying to get some weight on. I'm kind of standing off to one side, waiting for Gary to finish using the flat bench. Gary wasn't quite as big as Tookie, but he was still one of the most jacked up and scary-looking dudes you ever want to see. I didn't know who he was, didn't know his rep with the brims. He was big as fuck, sure, but I didn't know this dude as a notorious banger. For some reason, my stupid ass, while he's on the bench, a whole mess of 45-pound plates rattling, I get this uncontrollable urge to make a loud fart sound with my mouth as soon as he lowers the bar to his chest and goes to press it. I don't know what the fuck I was thinking. Gary locks out the bar, racks the weights, sits up real slow, then looks at me. He's real quiet at first. Oh, you think that's funny? Now, I got this swole-up 260-pound killer glaring at me. Nigga, come here. He takes me into this little area between the gym and locker room. There was a short hallway, and he closed the door, locked me in there with him. Then Gary tells me to hit him as hard as I can in the chest. Now, at the time, I'm maybe 130 pounds, soaking wet. Gary is a wall of muscle, easily twice my weight. I'm scared to hit him, because I think he's just using it as an excuse to kill me. Yo, just hit me, nigga. Finally, I hit him in the chest as hard as I could. It was like punching a truck. He didn't even flinch. Then, Bam! He dipped down and threw a short right hook into my leg. Then he smiled, then turned, and he bounced. Talk about a fucking Charlie horse. I was doubled over. I could hardly walk. Okay, Gary was too big to be fucking with me, but he had to teach me a lesson. If he'd hit me in the face or broke my arm, he wouldn't have been respected for that. I was too small and I wasn't gangbanging. It was just like the little homie did something stupid and he checked me. You saw a lot of that shit back in the day. Homies getting checked by the older niggas. About 5 minutes after, I was sitting in the locker room nursing the Charlie horse. A bunch of my homies crowded around me, breathless, shouting, "Yo, fool, you know who you was fucking with?" That shit left a bruise for a month. You have to remember I had never seen nothing back east. I didn't know anything about banging. I was green to all kinds of violence. It wasn't like I was from Brooklyn or the Bronx. It wasn't like I was from Newark, though I was technically born there. I was from Summit, and that's not a place where a kid would see gunplay or nothing. That's why I always claimed the West Coast. I didn't kick up any dust back east. I was a late bloomer in this criminal game. Gangs have transformed radically since my day. Once crack hit, it changed the whole gang system from being territorial and about neighborhood pride into sheer free enterprise, straight crime for hire. There's not any real true pecking order anymore. Today it's strictly about money. Back then, I don't even think the gangs made money. It was about repping your block, repping your hood, repping your set. In the 80s and 90s, the crack game broke all the gangs and splintered them off into little money-making sets. It made everything more violent, more about gunplay, more about constant retaliation. That's when most people across the country started hearing about the Crips and Bloods, when there was already a bloodbath in L.A. Honestly, I don't think gangbanging could have taken off the way it had if it had started off so violent. That life had to get a foothold, almost based on teams, based on neighborhood camaraderie. Dudes were still scary, but they still had some codes of chivalry. Still had more innocent shit like Gary checking me without really doing serious damage. The irony is, the more violent the life got, the more inescapable it got. Once people started to die all the time, that's when cats could no longer get out. Because when murder is added into the mix, banging transforms into a whole other thing. It's not like you can quit your set now. I was lucky in the sense that I never got formally inducted into the gang banging. I was never jumped into a set. And the only reason is because I didn't live in the hood with the gang. I was still walking to school from my block in View Park. My friends Burnett and Frizzell and I were coming down from the hills, and we actually created a gang, more or less as a joke, called the EPA, Eliminators Pimpin' Association. It started as a laugh, but it escalated until we basically had Crenshaw niggas believing that there was 100 motherfuckers in the hills. We set up our own thing, but it was like a shell company. It was just the three of us in the whole fucking gang. Still, my boy Burnett was a big tough guy, and Frizzell was a guy who'd moved from the avenues into the hills. He had that street swagger, being an avenues kid. His mother was actually a Crip mama. That's a mother that deals day to day with the gangs, so having a couple of tough friends, that's all it took. We never got punked. Outsiders don't always know this, but you can't join a set if you're not from that neighborhood. It was only toward the end of my time at Crenshaw that I really got closer to the gang life. When I got into the 12th grade, my girlfriend, Adrienne, was in the 10th grade. She was a light-skinned girl, athletic build, with a crazy body, big booty, just my type. Somehow or other, I found the right words to talk to her. We hooked up, and it was a while before I realized that she lived in the heart of Hooverhood, 73rd and Hoover. I ended up getting affiliated with their set because I started to go over there and hang out with the Hoover Crips. These days, the Hoovers have broken away from the Crips and call themselves ABK, Anybody Killers. They're now known for combining the color orange with the blue, wearing orange bandanas in their back pockets, and Houston Astros baseball caps with a prominent orange H. See, that's how it works in the street. My girl's a Criplet, so I'm brought in and I'm affiliated. The act of actually banging is different. It's retaliating, doing drive-bys, and all that shit is like being a frontline soldier. Now, if you live in the neighborhood, you're going to wear the colors. You damn sure can't wear the other colors. And you become an affiliate. And if you're dating a girl from the neighborhood, you get that same affiliation. Oh, we know Trey. Trey's good with us. Come shoot craps, come party, come hang out. You're a part of the set, but it would be disrespectful and dishonest to claim you're an actual banger. They liked my style. I was a little flyer. I had that West Side look. I got a cool personality. I've always had a sucker-proof personality. If people get past the surface and get to know me, within 30 minutes I can flip pretty much anybody. I'm not trying to sound boastful. I'm just a cool dude, or try to be. I met Adrienne's brother and younger sister. I met everybody on her block. The gangbangers on the block took to me. I was a lightweight, but starting to become a hustler. I could gamble. I could talk the talk. I was slick. I didn't let anyone call me Tracy anymore. That sounded like a girl's name to me. I was known in the streets as Trey. One of the shot callers from the hood was a guy everyone called Puppet. He was the real Hoover OG. For some reason, he took me under his wing. I used to sit up in Puppet's house. He'd be saying, "Yo, Trey, maybe we should roll on these swans." He was setting up drive-bys with me sitting right next to him. "Yo, Trey, we should blast these niggas." I was thinking, hold up, cuz, that ain't what I do. You niggas want to do war talk. I'm over here chilling with my girlfriend while you bangers are plotting out shit. Still, I was deep enough in the life to understand one crucial thing about the gang life. The flip side of the violence and negativity is the love. And that's some extreme love. Extreme love. I only realized this recently. When I got to Crenshaw High, that's the first time I'd ever heard someone say love to me. My aunt never said she loved me. My mother and father were never big on that word. You get to Crenshaw, and you got a male friend saying, "Cuz ain't nothing never finna happen to you, homie. You safe, cuz. I love you." That's some heavy shit. Like a lot of the homies, I was getting something I wished I'd gotten from my father. When I was a little kid and something happened to me, I didn't want my dad to call the police. Fuck that. I wanted to say, "Go get him, Dad." Of course, hardly anybody has it like that in real life. But every little kid wants to believe that his pops is Superman. And that protection you get from the gang is something most people in the hood don't get from their families. To me, it's interesting that some of the kids who came from big families, families with 4 or 5 brothers, didn't need to join the gangs because they had that unconditional protection. "Yo, don't fuck with me. I got a couple of brothers that will come see you, nigga." I didn't have that big family structure. And like everybody else, I wanted that feeling that someone had my back. Yes, the first I really heard love expressed was with the Crips. Not only heard the word love, but saw it firsthand. Saw it manifested. Saw that if you fuck with one of us, you fuck with all of us. That's very enticing. That's very attractive to a young brother. It's human nature. We've always had armies and tribes, teams and squads. That sense of loyalty, brotherhood, love. It's very primal. It's at the core of what it means to be a human. And it's authentic love, as real and as deeply felt as any love out there. But it's just misdirected in gangs. This audiobook is continued on Disc 2.